Hikers of Reddit, what's the weirdest/scariest thing you've found/seen during a hike? Hiking early morning in Hawaii and my stomach notifies me that it's time to go number 2. I find a porta potty near the trailhead and jump in to do my business. Once complete, I flipped my headlamp on to find the toilet paper, but instead find a huge, 5 in diameter, banana spider hanging out in the corner of the porta potty. Trying not to spook it, I slowly reached for the 1-ply. As I do, my headlamp shines on this monster and it proceeds to freak the F out. It runs in circles for a bit, both of us losing our minds at this point, and ends up between my legs inside of my underwear. I'm at a complete loss for what to do, but eventually begin wiggling back and forth in an attempt to get this spider to remove itself. That didn't work at all. Instead of exiting the premises, this mfo runs up my leg. This is the point where I give up and storm out of the porta potty yelling and screaming, pants around my ankles. No clue what happened to that spider, but it disappeared in a flash, just like my dignity. Mountain lion came very close to me. It didn't seem aggressive, but it was curious. After a few minutes of us staring at each other and me pissing my pants, he finally lost interest and disappeared into the forest while I got the fuck out of there. I could vaguely hear some kind of instrument being played. The closer I got, I could make out it was a saxophone. This dude was walking the trail through the woods while playing a fucking sax. I passed him and he said, "Beautiful day for music." Thought I wandered into a Twin Peaks episode. I stumbled on a poaching dump when I was 14. I used to hike trails near our home, way out in the woods. I'd explore, and then have to find my way back without a compass. I went really far one day, probably 2 to 3 miles through these old logging trails. I started smelling something terrible. There was a rocky outcrop right before a steep cliff. At the bottom of the cliff, there was a massive pile of dead deer. Most were decapitated. Some were fawns. Had to have been 20 to 30 of them at varying states of decay. The stench was mind-alteringly bad. When I thought I had seen enough, I heard 4-wheelers and decided to hide. 2 poachers in camo rolled up and tossed 2 more deer carcasses on the pile. They smoked, talked, and then left after about 10 minutes. I was probably 15 feet from them the entire time, hiding under a hemlock tree. I did not recognize either of them, and I knew absolutely everyone on that entire side of town. It was only 15 to 20 houses in a 5-mile stretch. I ran home and told my parents. They didn't believe me. Plus, they didn't know I was running off to those trails. So I got in huge trouble for that. I mentioned it to our neighbor who was big into hunting. He seemed very concerned and brought it up to the game warden. They investigated it, found the dump site, but never caught anybody. I am 100% certain it was not my neighbor. My wife and I were on our honeymoon. We were on an island in Thailand, and about 2 hours into a jungle hike. In the middle of nowhere, we hear bloody curdling screams of desperation. My first thoughts were someone had fallen and broken their leg or something and we need to help them. Eventually, we get to this person who was hysterics after being lost in this jungle for almost a full day. It turned out he lives less than a mile from us back in the UK and works for my best friend. Late 90s, I was in my junior year of HS and hiking up Usery Mountain in East Mesa. As with my best bud and 2 girls we liked, we reached the wind cave at the top, but wanted to keep going, so we scrambled up to the summit to take in the view. My friend was sitting on a rock and noticed an old rusty Altoids tin box and picked it up. Inside were 2 folded up pieces of white paper which he spread out on the rock. The first page was a crude sketch of the view from that exact spot drawn in pencil with the caption "The last view from," name SIs with the date. I believe it was only some months or a year past. The second page was an apology letter listing people in this person's life and things they were sorry to have said or did to them. We surmised that it was a suicide note and started searching the backside of Usery for ... anything, something, remains, clothes, more clues. Nothing. This was the late 90s and internet search was not really a thing yet, so we went to the Central Mesa Library to sort through the microfiche files, skimming through newspapers a little after the date on the drawing for any lost person notices or any news related, and again nothing. but it was fun feeling like I was Encyclopedia Brown for an afternoon. Some years later my friend moved to another part of the US and hasn't really kept in touch, but I often wonder if he still has the tin and if he ever found the person's identity using modern research methods. Unsatisfying end to the story, I know, but it was definitely a little creepy and a little sad. Plus I got to use the word microfiche. East Mesa has a surprising amount of culty aspects that I experienced growing up. I should probably write them all down. Hiking in Alaska, I once found myself 50 yards from a grizzly bear and her cub. But weirdly, I wasn't worried as we were at a creekside that was having a heavy salmon run and she was way more interested in the fish than me. I just took some pictures and then backed away slowly. What actually did scare the shit out of me was the time I was hiking near Homer, on what felt like an almost suburban bike path. A moose and her calf walked out of the woods in front of me. Moose are so huge, they are not like deer at all. I was in sight of my car, but she was between me and it. I was hoping she would continue walking, but she decided to stop and eat some of the tall shrubbery along the edge of the path, all the while staring at me. It felt like hours that I stood there frozen until she eventually moved on, but in reality, it was probably only a few minutes. I've seen mountain lions, I've seen bears. The scariest thing I've seen was an elaborate grow operation in Northern California. I crested a hill and walked 20 yards into this valley when I realized there were irrigated pot plants for as far as the eye could see. Reservoirs, hoses, camouflaged netting. My friend and I noped out of there as fast we could, both expecting to be shot on our way back to our car. I watched a doe give birth once. I have been hiking and backpacking for 25 years and have seen bears, mountain lion prints, etc. But honestly, the scariest thing has always been other people. Not people I think are going to attack me. People I think are going to die. Heh, the number of people I see miles from the trailhead with just a t-shirt and shorts and nothing else. Nothing in their hands, no bag, no water, no food, no hat, no extra layers, compass, rain gear, etc. The worst was when I was 6 miles into a backpacking trip. It was nearly dark. I'd be hiking a couple hours in darkness before I made camp, and this guy with nothing but shorts and a t-shirt passed me headed in the other direction. He was going to be in pitch black soon, with no headlamp, or jacket, or food. He looked really stressed out. Some group of people were walking down from a summit up to 13k foot and chatted in passing for a moment when a guy was like, "Oh, and if you find my phone that I dropped," sarcastically, like we're going to find his phone. No shit, I almost stepped on it, on a green hillside. It was face down in a green case. Definition of needle in a haystack. Crazy. Just a couple weeks ago, I had the honor of staring down the angry eyes of a bison charging at me. He stopped when I yelled at him in a strong assertive voice, but holy shit. It made me realize just how helpless I was miles away from any other people. In the middle of nowhere, written in the snow, were the words "Per audacia ignotium," although there were no footprints nearby. They had probably been spoken for a few hours. "Through audacity towards the unknown" was the most accurate translation we could discover. On a backpacking trip in the Sierra Mountains in California, my buddy forgot to put his toothpaste in the bear bag, which is a bag you put all food and aromatic items in to hang from a tree branch at night so the bears won't eat it. At about 2 a.m., we hear him yelling and get up to find a huge black bear on top of him in his tent trying to get at the toothpaste. The rest of us had to bang pans and throw rocks to get the bear to leave him alone. I was alone on a night hike. Long story, good amount of stupidity involved, in an area with wild boars and bears. As I'm walking, staggeringly fast, mind you, I hear something big rustle in the foliage on my right. I damn near shit myself on the spot. It sounded like it was getting closer and tracking around me. Thank fuck it went away after what felt like 20 minutes with my butt cheeks clenched so tight that my uterus probably ascended all the way into my chest. Realistically, it, whatever the fuck it was, probably treaded around me for maybe a minute tops. Back in early 2000s, before weed was legal, I was hiking deep into the redwood forest in Humboldt with my dog, and 4 pit bulls popped out of the forest and jumped us. My dog slipped his collar and took off in the opposite direction. Luckily I have a lot of dog experience because I worked at a dog daycare and grabbed the biggest one by the scruff of the neck and seized him and landed him on the ground until he stopped squirming, and fortunately the others didn't bite, just barked. Let him go and they ran back into the forest, whistled for my dog and he came running, and got the fuck out of there before the likely illegal pot farm owners found me. Back in 2015 I was on a hiking trail in Arizona. I have hiked a lot in worse terrains in Europe, so I wasn't too worried about doing it alone. It was almost getting dark and I was at an eerily deserted stretch for what felt like hours now. Suddenly I heard a kind of music. As I kept going I realized it was someone whistling. It gave me the creeps, but the idea of company relieved me a bit too. Soon enough I saw a man in front me walking the same direction. He was wearing a t-shirt and pants, which was surprisingly inadequate especially for the impending night. I passed him by. He was the one whistling indeed, turned to say the customary greetings. He looked up, deadpan, and without a word turned back down towards the ground and kept whistling. He was walking slowly on an almost trance-like manner. I quickly averted my gaze forward and almost abruptly the whistling stopped. I turned back to see what happened and there was absolutely no one on the trail. Zilch. Didn't even feel like anyone had been there. Needless to say I freaked the fuck out. I made it back without any further issues, but I still think about what I saw/heard that night. I was on a hike with my Boy Scout troop and my friend, and I went off the trail a little bit and we found a person hanging in a tree, one of the most traumatic things I have ever seen. In the 1970s my then best friend and I went to the same summer day camp. Once a week they'd drive us to a state park for the day. They'd arrange games, baseball, soccer, etc., for us to play to keep us kids occupied. My friend and I hated sports and preferred not to play. We'd rather take solitary hikes in the woods and explore. We weren't allowed to go off alone without counselors, so we never asked permission. One time we came across a milk crate filled with cartons of milk, right in the middle of the woods, far from any place that would need it. They weren't even expired, old, or spoiled. It was good, fresh milk. Why would anyone deposit a single crate filled with cartons of fresh milk out in the middle of nowhere? Hundreds of dolls hanging from a tree in different styles of torture. Hiking in Vermont. Saw a bright red shirt hanging in a tree off the trail, so I went to check it out. Saw a couple of freshly dug graves and a few really old headstones. Reported it. Turns out it was someone stealing headstones from a local graveyard and relocating them. Don't know if they were stealing the bodies. 2. Walking down the path we heard some rustling. On one side of the path was a young bear and on the other was a big bear, presumably mama. There was a makeshift bridge up ahead about 50 yards, so we very quietly walked up and got across that. Baby crossed the path right where I had been and rejoined mama and they walked off. I was hiking in northern Ontario through an old mining road. Years of neglect had fallen tons of trees. My partner and I had 27 pounds packs on, so ducking or going over fallen trees was time-consuming/tiring. We got to the point on the trail where we needed to go south to the lake. There was a beach there we spotted on Google Earth. Thinking nothing of it, we head straight through the forest, no path. For those that have been through boreal forest, you know what I am talking about. I'm up front for the first part. I step near a conifer truck. I'm 2 feet away from the trunk, but my foot disappears into a hole. I don't lose my balance and quickly recover, but used a nearby stick to poke around the area. It's just a fake top with broken branches and brown pine needles. Don't know how far it went down. Came to the realization, there are a lot of holes in this forest. We kept our distance from any conifer trunk and made it safely to our destination. It was worth the hike. And we made it safely home. If something bad had happened, we were many miles away from the main road and tough hauling back through the old mining road. Great memory, but ... This 6 cottonmouth that almost bit a fellow hiker. I think about 5 of us went from 100 BPM to 150 BPM when it struck. Thankfully it missed him. Took us a while to chase it off. It was huge. https://imager.com/g5pio68 jpg. Absolutely nothing at all. Twice in 2 different parts of the country. Of course the answer is more complicated than that. I'm a very seasoned hiker, 2 long trails under my belt, a few thousand trail miles and hundreds of nights spent in the woods, many of them solo. I've had black bears around my tent numerous times, even been booped in my hammock by one. TLDR, not much bothers me while camping, I'll just tell one. The experiences were similar enough that the second is just redundant. I was passed out in my hammock one night around 2 a.m. in a familiar area I've hiked and camped for years, and suddenly I'm wide awake and almost buzzing like someone with way too much caffeine in their system. Think stacking a monster with a pre-workout. Dropped out of my hammock to take a look around, fully enclosed hammock with the rain fly up. I don't see anything odd. I don't hear anything at all, which is weird because the woods are never quiet. Everything feels heavy AF, very oppressive feeling. My brain goes into GTFO mode, tearing down, stuffing everything in my pack. I also did something I've never done while hiking, grab my holster and pistol and clip it to my pack. I always conceal, but not that night. Around then I notice a barely audible, very high-pitched whine, but I can't figure out a direction on it. It's just there. I haul ass about a half-mile down trail back towards the trailhead and the car, and it just stopped. Felt fine, panic went down, I was hearing normal things in the woods and whole feeling of oppression stopped. I don't know what happened. Was it a sleep disturbance leading in an anxiety attack both times? I've read exposure to ELF magnetic fields cause such a reaction. Something supernatural? I have absolutely no clue. Some searches led me to learn it's a phenomena. There is a Reddit thread on one of the paranormal subs about it. I also found this link that describes it pretty well. https://paranormalauthority.com/panicinthewoods/. I'm not sure if I can call this a hiking story, but I hope this will make sense. While I was still living in the US with my dad, we would often visit my grandma. She lived in the middle of the woods, but there was still some land to walk freely without going into the woods. My dad and I were driving to her house to repair something because she was gone for a few days and couldn't call anyone. My dad needed something, so he wanted to go ask her neighbors to see they have what he needed. I was doing my own thing till I turned around, seeing my uncle, grandma's son, looking straight at me from the corner of the house. I shouted out to my dad, "Hey Dad, Uncle's name is over there." He didn't see him, so I told him to follow me, and that's where my uncle just walked away. Every time we turned the corner I would see him walking off. My dad eventually asked where he was, and I would tell him that he keeps turning the corner over and over. He went around the house one more time and didn't find my uncle anywhere. That's where I got scared and told him I don't feel so well and if we can go back home. Since my dad couldn't do anything cause he didn't have the thing that he needed, we just went home. While we're driving away I looked in the side view mirror and saw my so-called uncle standing by the house. I'm now 18 and still wondering what I saw. A man donning an I-hold Ku Klux Klan cap, not another. Masturbating. In 7th grade, I rode my bike past him in the woods on the way home. It was indeed Florida. Me, my old roommate and a friend went hiking into the woods in Tennessee. We were going along minding our own business. Then we came up on a stream. On the other side of the stream, getting ready to cross, was a group of about 5 or 6 dudes only wearing socks and shoes. Naked brothers hiking in the woods. I'm all about being in your birthday suit or whatever, but it was weird seeing it for the first time, and apparently it's a thing.